Hello, everybody. It's really lovely to be with you all this afternoon. We are going to be spending the next hour with you talking about supporting mental health and wellbeing in your school or college. My name is Kate and this is Caroline, and we're really pleased to be actually in the Collins building today, live and direct from there. Yeah, it's lovely to be with you all. I'm sorry if some of you were waiting. We had a little slight tech issue. So, thank you, my darling. So who are we? Caroline, who are you?
Who am I? That's a good question. I'm Caroline Hounsell. I am a psychotherapist and I'm also a trainer, and I've been working in education for about 25 years.
Wonderful, thank you, Caroline. And I'm Kate. I have co-authored quite a few books for HarperCollins now. Lots of them are in the background there, some of the Your Choice bits and pieces. And I had the pleasure of calling Caroline in to work with me on the latest Key Stage 5 book that I've written, which is just newly out. I'll sort of show you about that at the end if you don't know already. She helped me with the mental health lessons that we did on that, which was a pleasure to work with Caroline, as always. So that is us. So I've done that. I'm also a PSHE consultant, so I do lots of work, keep myself very busy doing and keeping out mischief, doing lots of different things. So
I'll do that.
Thank you, darling.
Okay.
Thank you. So what are we going to cover in this session? So we're going to talk about risk factors and protective factors, signs of poor mental health and mental ill health, mental health in schools, and teacher well-being. So it's a little snapshot of what we're going to be doing. Thank you, Caroline. Oh, it's a 1 hour session. We've got lots of opportunities for you to ask questions and have we got the chat up? Can we put the chat up? Okay, I'll let someone deal with that, but do please ask us any questions as we go, and we're going to hopefully have some time at the end where we can do that as well. So don't worry if you're burning, desperate to ask us something, we're hopefully going to have time to do that. If for any reason we run out of time, we'll make sure we get those answers to you. Okay, so just a question really about who you are. Now, obviously, you can't say this to us. If you could just pop it in the chat. I'd love to know who you are, where you're from. We'd love to know, sorry, who you are, where you're from, and what your role is. So an example would be, if it was me, I'd say, hi, I'm Kate, I'm in London, and I'm a PSHE consultant. So really simple, just be lovely to see who we've got in the room. I always find it sad when I can't see all your lovely faces. So we're just going to have a look at what's coming in.
We've got such an amazing, diverse bunch of people here.
It's still coming in.
Still coming in.
Well, I'll tell you what, just do this and we'll watch you all the whole way.
We're going to have to move on.
We are going to have to move on, my darling. Can you do the next slide, please?
Yes, I can. Okay.
Okay, so first thing we'd love to know, again, this is just we're not going to make you chat to us the whole way through, don't worry, you're going to have a little break. How confident you feel about supporting mental health and wellbeing in your school? And obviously some of you are coming from slightly different angles. That's absolutely fine. So you could just forget the in your school and just how confident you feel about supporting mental health and wellbeing. So a 10 would be love it, a 1 would be yikes. That's why I'm here, because I don't feel quite so confident about it. So if you could just pop a number down in the chat for us, we can just get a feel for where you're all at.
Oh, it's on the poll.
Is that the poll?
So you're getting really whizzy.
Okay, so our lovely Sarah assistant, who, if we look over there, because we're looking at the very lovely Sarah, who is doing fantastic work for us, she's just set up a poll for us. So we're going to have a look at that in a moment. It's coming in.
I feel like we should have a little drum roll. Amazing, thank you, Sarah. All right, so what we've got, that's really interesting. Share as well. Let's have a little look.
Yeah, so we're going to share that.
Share results. I'm going to share these results.
You've got some super confident.
Wow. Okay, so what we've
There's
got
a real
here,
range actually. Look,
yeah.
None of you are 1, 2, 3. That's good. So
we've got what, 10% 4, 30% 5, 10% 6, 10% 7, 20% 8. Oh, we've got a lovely 10.
Yeah.
20% 10.
Yeah,
amazing.
Brilliant. Well, you're all very welcome, whatever your confidence, and hopefully we'll give you something that you can take away and build your confidence even further. So those 10s, you know, sky's the limit for you. So yeah, next slide, please. I feel like you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Okay. Do you want to actually say this, because this was something that you came up
Yeah,
with?
so I think, you know, we're talking about mental health. I think the World Health Organization's got some really great stuff on it. And this is a lovely quote, because when we ask about what we mean by health and mental health and well-being, a lot of the time when we think about mental health, we think of mental ill health. And actually, mental health, physical health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And I think it's really interesting around healthcare generally, because what we've done is we've focused either on mental health or physical health. And if you think about it, you know, when you get a physical illness, often you feel mentally unwell.
Yeah.
And when you're mentally unwell, you often feel it in your body.
Yeah.
So like kind of problems with stomach or back problems or skin problems.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think it's lovely that we're just focusing on the health there, and I still find it strange that there's this sort of concept that we cut off here, that this is all one health and that's another. So yeah, so I think that's a really good definition for us. Okay, so Caroline's going to talk you through some of the sort of deeper aspects of mental health.
Okay, so when we're talking about mental health, we often talk about these risk and protective factors, and these are simply evidence-based risk factors or protective factors that we know that either damage our mental health or protect our mental health. So I'm going to take you through a few. I'm sure you're aware of a few of these, but the risk factors, we know that statistically, if you've got two people, the more people that are exposed to a lot of these risk factors, that person's got the more risk factors, the more likely they are to become mentally unwell. So clearly abuse, trauma, neglect, particularly if you're thinking about those formative years between 0 to 5, but also any experience of abuse, trauma, neglect, maybe a genetic predisposition. So for many of those mental health issues run in the family, just like to do with physical health issues, that kind of increases the risk. I think it's really important to say as a caveat, just because you might have some of these doesn't mean that you're more likely to definitely going to become unwell. It just increases the risk, because what we're going to look in a minute is protective factors. So, you know, clearly poor housing, if you're experiencing homelessness, if you're unemployed, particularly if you're unemployed for longer than 6 months or more, you'll increase risk around depression, for example, losing your job, redundancy, family conflict, particularly when a person doesn't feel safe, or family disorganization, where there's a lot of conflict and chaos in the home, social isolation, loneliness. This has been a real problem, particularly with the repeated lockdowns that we've been having in the last few years, and a lot of the isolation and fear that people are thinking of. We're social creatures, we need to connect. And when we disconnect, we feel loneliness and social isolation. Also rural communities that might be quite far away from one another. If we experience discrimination, stigma, including racism, that can impact. For people who have social disadvantage, poverty, debt, clearly a risk factor. I think any sort of loss is a major problem for a lot of mental health issues, particularly things like depression and anxiety. And sometimes those losses are really obvious, like a bereavement, but sometimes they're much more subtle, like the loss of what could have been, you know, or the loss of a relationship, or the loss of aspiration, opportunity, severe or long-term stress, physical health condition, or being a carer for someone, drug and alcohol misuse, and kind of physical causes, clearly things like head injury, for example. So there's some of the risk factors. Now, when we look at the opposite, these are the things that kind of cushion us and protect us from experiencing a mental health issue. So kind of experiencing positive parenting, being able to be have a lot of self-belief, having a lot of confidence, learning how to solve problems, you know, rather than just being overwhelmed by problems, learning how to communicate. And this is a massive thing. So there's one thing knowing what you think and feel, and there's another thing using good communication skills to convey that. And I'd always recommend nonviolent communication in a way of communicating, because it's such a powerful tool. So if you've not heard of that, do some research on it. It is brilliant. Conflict resolution, how do we deal with these difficult experiences? Again, nonviolent communication is really good for that. Coping skills, respectful relationships, emotional literacy. Now that's really interesting, because you know, we work a lot with young people, particularly when you ask them how they feel, they just don't know.
Yeah.
They're not connected. So I think it's really important to kind of really encourage our young people and the adults and parents to understand their own emotions and be able to express them. Values and beliefs, deeply personal, and again, community-wide, living in a really welcoming community where you feel welcomed and accepted, even further than living in a tolerant community or welcoming, particularly when we think about diversity. So things like also meaningful activities. It doesn't necessarily mean to be work, but you could be volunteering, something that gives you purpose in the day. Having a good social network, investing in your arts and culture, having a stable home environment, obviously lots of physical exercise. We know that's really good for our mental health. Investing in good nutrition, because we can be deficient in certain minerals and vitamins, and that can then lead to mental health issues. Really important, rest and reflection.
Yeah.
Really important in a really busy world with gadgets and demands. It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah,
so allowing that.
I was just thinking on the way in, when I was on the tube, I scribbled down some thoughts on my experience of how that can be integrated into schools. I know you're not in schools, but those of you who are, and I got going and I was like, oh, let's flow with it. So just some ideas for thinking about that. And it's quite hard sometimes, isn't it, if we think about that welcoming community in a school. Obviously, we all want to create a working community, but I think sometimes when we think about sort of mental health aspects and bring in those elements, sometimes it can be sort of a drop-down day, or we've got obviously this week is very focused on mental health in schools, but it can be such a lovely part of day-to-day school life. And I just wrote down some of the things that I did. I was a teacher, by the way, for 10 years, so I know how you all feel. So these are some of the things that I did in my class. So having a lot of time for reflection. I know that a lot of these things obviously came up, but just putting that into context. Circle time, if that's something you think would be appropriate for your children, and giving them that sense of belonging, and that belonging as their sort of authentic selves. I have the privilege of working in a primary school with children the same class in year 2, year 5 and year 6. And because I consistently connected them up to how they were feeling and expressing that, giving them the vocabulary and the language and the space to be listened to and the space to not say anything if they didn't want to. By the time they got to year 6, they were so comfortable and confident with talking about how they feel. So I do a check-in on a Monday morning, a check-out on a Friday, and obviously I do a daily sort of check-in as well with them in the morning, just something really, really simple. So all those things are really easy to do. Having water available, sort of simple stuff like that. Every now and then, if I felt that they were a bit down, I'd pop some music on and we'd have a little boogie. It's just little things you can do. And I think it's just bringing in those lovely sort of bits and pieces into your day, to sort of help bring that connection together and bring that sort of sense of people feeling like they can be themselves a bit. Because I think sometimes schools can be very sort of, you feel like and you included, feel like you have to kind of be a certain way or put on a certain mask, and it's nice to just break that and be a bit human sometimes. So I just thought I'd throw some of my ideas there, and obviously having opportunities for them to talk to you about how they feel, whether that's anonymous boxes or pupil voice, all those sorts of things. So I just thought I'd throw that in for those of you who are in schools. Yeah,
lovely. So I guess, has anybody got any thoughts or questions really? Is anything coming up on the chat?
Not yet. Or anything that you feel you do that you'd like to share. You don't have to be a teacher. Anything that you, in your professional experience or working with people, on any of those things we discussed, you feel like, oh, I'd like to share that. That's worked really well for me. Do feel like you can stick that in as well. Be proud.
I think it's great to get good practice shared.
100%.
Because we can learn a lot from all the great things that are going on in other schools. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so we'll wait. If you've got any thoughts or anything, then we can kind of link in. So I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of language around mental health. This idea around poor mental health versus mental ill health. And I think where I sit with it at the moment is poor mental health doesn't meet the criteria of a mental health issue. It's like we can have good mental health and we can have poor mental health, and we can go move up and down that all the while. And it doesn't mean that we are mentally unwell. It just is that we're just not feeling great, when we're feeling flat. We're human. And I think that's really important to kind of share in there. Now, mental ill health is when it meets that criteria of having a mental health issue. So this is kind of language that we might use. Poor mental health, mental ill health meets the criteria for what we would call a mental health condition. In the UK, we work to the ICD-11, but we've also got the DSM-5. These are basically mental health manuals of different diagnoses and how we support, etc. So in this continuum, it's an interesting continuum because mental health exists on a continuum. And on one end, you can see in this example that you've got healthy, where the green arrow is on the left. And then on the other end, you've got kind of ill. And you can read it yourself, really, to see like where we all are. Now, we're all on this continuum. So if you think about kind of my experience often in the mental health space is we're very reactive. So we tend to do a lot of work in that kind of ill, maybe even injured space. Do you see what I mean? Someone's not particularly happy or well, and then we put all the interventions if we got it there.
Yeah.
Now, I think what I would say, just like physical health, is that we need to move more upstream. And so I think in mental health literacy, we call it, you know, people's awareness of mental health needs to be cascaded to everybody. So do we know what we mean by mental health? What do we mean by mental ill health? What do we mean by kind of risk factors, protective factors? How do we spot the signs and symptoms which we're going to cover? So I think if we start putting a baseline in that everybody gets a level of mental health understanding right at that healthy spectrum, and that actually we don't necessarily highlight and pinpoint a lot of the attention on the people that are unwell. Yeah. So when you look at an average school, what often happens is that all the attention goes on the people that are not particularly well, the kids that are not particularly well, and actually they often feel that pressure of being isolated and overly focused on. So what we were talking about when we were looking at that, wouldn't it be really great to sort of move upstream and do lots of kind of mental health and wellbeing work, which we'll talk about at the end around healthy schools, but also maybe pick it up earlier. And we were talking about how great it would be to have those early signs and symptoms of when someone's possibly in the reacting space. So when you start to see that nervousness, that irritability, maybe that sadness, maybe you've got the children or even each other. I mean, you know, one of the things that we're talking about is you can't really separate mental health from the children, from the staff working in the school, and even the parents and the caregivers. So creating a really open door policy that Kate was already mentioned, where it's okay not to be okay, and that you're checking in early and having those early conversations so that you can get, the sooner you get help, the better the recovery. And that means that we just end up having poor mental health and moving back up into a good mentally healthy space without it becoming mental ill health. So, you know, that kind of tiredness, that low energy, that muscle tension, those headaches that we get when we're a little bit stressed, maybe procrastination because what we're dealing with, or the young people are dealing with, is just difficult. We don't know how to do it, so we put it off. And also we just stop kind of seeing people and doing those social activities because we haven't got the energy. So, you know, you can see at the bottom, got all the signs and symptoms at the top. At the bottom are very simple actions that we can all take. So particularly in that reacting space, those lifestyle medicines are great. You know, recognizing your limits, thinking about your basics, getting really good rest, getting your sleep in, eating the right food, making sure you minimize things like sugar and caffeine. Caffeine, I've got a cup of coffee here. It's got caffeine in it. It's a stimulant. So if I'm feeling anxious, I've got to be really wary of this. Engaging in healthy coping strategies. So kind of rather than adapting those unhelpful coping strategies like drinking alcohol or avoiding and bottling things up, those sort of things. And then identifying and minimizing stressors. So what are the things that are causing the stress? And how do we minimize those? And how do we dial up, increase all those helpful coping strategies that we can have? And we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah, I think this is really useful to think about, this idea of it being a scale that we all go up and down. You don't have just some children who are more prone to this than others. You know, in a whole class, anybody can go up and down that scale at any time, you know, unless they've got a diagnosis or something. And I think for me, the PSHE sort of rant I'm always on about is this idea of preventative. You know, if we put in those skills at the beginning, then we of course we can't wrap everybody up and stop life from happening to them and emotions from happening to them, but we're giving them the skills and the ability to be able to talk to people about how they feel, or how they don't know how they feel, but they feel odd, sort of thing. You know, so I think it's so important. And that reacting stage, as you were sort of focusing on that, I think that's really interesting. You know, it's like, you know, the healthy reacting actually as educators focusing on them and thinking these are the things we need to sort of keep dripping in through everything that they do, you know, all the lessons, all the activities, when they're moving through school, when they're, you know, when they come into school, and all those things, just helping them feel that they can sort of be open to talking when they do feel injured, or you know, that sort of progressing on. You know.
Okay, so what are we looking out for? And you notice when I'm talking to you, I'm not really separating children's and adults' mental health. They're so interconnected. So, for example, if we as teachers or adults around children are feeling really anxious, anxiety is really contagious, and the odds are that other people around are going to be picking up. Yeah. And we're also going to be picking up from the kids. So, you know, I think we need to look at this whole school approach around how we manage mental health. But what are we looking for? So behaviourally, it's likely that we're going to see a person crying, or maybe just isolating themselves, withdrawing from other people, maybe really struggling with those responsibilities that previously they really were fine with. That loss of interest, sometimes people lose interest in their parents, sometimes they don't, you know, but these are just genuinely signs and symptoms. And that loss of motivation, which is very much linked to energy. And physically, you are talking about kind of being tired all the time, lacking energy, just sleeping too much or too little, overeating or loss of appetite. You know, we've all got a different coping strategy. Some of us eat when we're stressed, some of us can't eat when we're stressed. And of course, kind of a body sensation, constipation, weight loss, weight gain, depending on whether eating too much or not enough. And then for women, irregular menstrual cycle, that gets affected, and loss of libido gets affected, and those unexplained aches and pains. So again, the body speaks the mind often when it's experiencing mental health issues. So if we move on to kind of thoughts and emotions, so what we're looking for is people are often very self-criticizing. So for example, like when we're depressed, I might think, for example, I can't do this, I'm really bad at my job, other people don't like me, what's the point, I can't be bothered anymore, whatever those kind of thoughts are. And the very nature of something like depression means that I'm projecting that out onto the world, and I'm assuming that everybody thinks the same thing about me. Do you see what I mean? So we often find it difficult, I think, to separate what we think about ourselves in that 100% mental health illness place and what the whole world does. So lots of very self-criticism. And I always talk about this inner critic who can get quite loud. We've all got one. And that's that really negative voice that kind of chips in. And what I always say about the inner critic, you've also got an inner champion. And the inner champion is your biggest superfan. So the more you invest in your inner critic, the louder it gets. That's a basic thing. So one of the things I would say is, if you've got that sort of frequent self-criticism, learn to stand up to it and just say, no, I'm not doing that. Because the more you listen to it, the more you feed it, the bigger it gets. So self-blame again, it's all my fault, I should have known, that worrying, that pessimism, often catastrophizing. And it's really difficult to remember stuff, because when we are unwell mentally, those little things, like I could be getting a cup of tea for Kate, and by the time I've got to the kitchen with the kettle, I've forgotten how Kate likes her tea. So
I would never do that.
So, and maybe before your memory was great and your concentration was great, this is a real sign. Little things like making decisions become really difficult. Maybe previously you're really, really clear about that. And then quite a lot of confusion, getting thoughts are jumbled up. And just when it gets severe, because 90% of suicides involve a mental health issue. So when you've got severe mental ill health, you are potentially at risk of having thoughts of death and suicide. And emotionally, that sadness, the anxiety, the guilt, the anger, really volatile mood swings, and maybe just feeling numb, lack of emotional responsiveness, and just feeling helpless and hopeless.
Yeah, no, I think they're important. I was just thinking while you were talking that, you know, how sometimes children are terribly good at masking all this as well, as are adults actually. You know, and I think having worked with children for 20 odd years now, I think one of the things is just go with your gut. You know, sometimes we have a sense about somebody, we can't quite, you know, we might look through the list of things and go, oh yeah, but if they were suffering, they'd have this, but you don't see it, but you just have this feeling that something's not right with them. Go with that gut, because chances are you are right. And I think sometimes we, especially sort of people in the field, you know, working with young people, we want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure we're doing right by them. And sometimes that can stop us actually voicing things that we have this sense of. So I would just encourage you to do that always, just to talk to senior leadership team or another colleague, and, you know, and just say, I've got this feeling about someone. I've done that before, and they've gone, oh, I've had that feeling about me too. So then it's like, okay, so there's something going on here. So I would just add that, because some children are really good at masking what's actually going on for them.
Yeah, I think just as you brought up for me, I'm thinking about how younger children, this might display quite differently. So when we were doing this, we were thinking actually it gets acted out, it's very physical, I've got a sore tummy, do you know what I mean? Like, and all of that sort of stuff, and my head hurts, it's very body often, or it's shown in a lot of behaviours, isn't it? When you watch children behave, maybe playing and playtime, how they're interacting with other students, you tend to just notice it. And the key is change. That's the most important thing, knowing your people enough, noticing that change.
Yeah, that's a good point, noticing change.
So I guess it's another opportunity for any thoughts and questions.
Or sharing of good practice.
Yeah. Have anybody got anything that they're thinking about, they want to ask? Just use the chat. We've got a lovely assistant there. We're going to be sharing things as well.
Okay.
That's fine. Well, we've got time at the end if you're still reflecting.
We'd just like to give you the chance. There's no pressure to, you don't have to ask this question. Only if it helps you. Okay, so just thinking now, sort of focusing a little bit on schools and colleges. This is some data that Caroline found actually, which is related to people in one classroom. So we've got one pupil in a class of 30 who has experienced the death of a parent. These are from secondary school age children. This was a survey that was done, or various surveys and things that were done in 2021. 4 pupils are living in lone parent families. 5 pupils have a mental health difficulty. 5 pupils are living in absolute poverty. 7 pupils have self-harmed. 11 have experienced bullying. So that, there's some high figures there, and that bullying at the bottom, we've talked about bullying a lot, haven't we? Do you want to add anything about those stats? Or
I just think, you know, if this is the average classroom, you know, this is quite something. This is what we're dealing with. This is the average classroom. Some of us are working in classrooms that have got a lot more risk factors. So, you know, all of these are, you know, at a class of 30 is quite significant of you know, things that are going on for these young people, these children. And, you know, it's even more important that we get into that preventative space, isn't it? And wouldn't it be really great if school was a real respite from what was going on outside of school, which it is for many young people and children. And I think this data is just, it's quite disturbing, isn't it?
It is disturbing, yeah. But I think sometimes, you know, as an educator or someone working with children, you feel like you've got to be this superhuman person who sees everything, and, you know, on top of all the other things you've got to do. And that this isn't for you to feel extra pressure. I think where this is helpful is like, this is real, this is happening. So it goes back to that thing about trusting your gut again, about you know, keeping those sort of simple little things. You know, 5 minutes of meditation at the beginning of a day or something, if your class feel like they're not good, whatever it is, the little tiny things that you can bring in to just build that sort of softness for some of these people and just open up those doorways. So this is really just for those of you who are in the UK and wanted to know where it sits. I'm not going to read all the way through this, but there's just basically where mental wellbeing sits. So England, we've got RSHE, as I'm sure you've all heard of. The subject's split into 2 sections, so it comes under physical health and mental wellbeing and relationships. In Scotland, they've got the curriculum for excellence, and the specific area there is mental health and wellbeing, is called health and wellbeing. And Wales, they've got a new curriculum coming in at the moment, so it's sort of brand new, so they're kind of rolling it in over the next few years. So I've just written that out for you in case you're interested in that. And they have the 6 areas of learning and expertise, and it covers mental wellbeing, which is called health and wellbeing in there as well. So they are in the curriculum, just for your information.
Okay, so when we are, this is a really great whole school approach from the NCB, National Children's Bureau, and you'll see quite a few out there if you Google whole school approach. And if you think about this, like what we know is doing that one day of well-being, mental health and well-being in a school just doesn't work. And it just needs to be really 3-dimensional. So if I just start and go clockwise, and I want to start with that long-term approach. So whatever we do, we need to have a long-term approach, because it takes time to start to build all of these things in. Okay, and we just need to think that we don't want to see instant results straight away. What you might even notice if you start building up this mental health is we call something like referral pathways. So referral pathways are professional counselling. You might have sport counselling, or you might work with other sort of therapy organisations. And often when you start to raise mental health literacy and also challenge stigma, you often get an increase in your referral pathways demand. And that's a really good sign. So I think that's really interesting. So the next point, if we go up clockwise, we've got encourage pupil voice. So many times we approach this excluding the pupil. And this is a massive mistake, because if you're not working with your pupils, you're going to get a kickback. And also what we think they're going to say about what they want and what they don't want is often very different. So right from the outset, we need to genuinely bring our pupils in. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great to have a kind of a really eclectic mix of a wellbeing, mental health and wellbeing group that's made up with all sorts of teachers, parents, children, everybody's equal. So really find out what your young people want.
Can I just say an ongoing?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, so it's an ongoing process, and it's where they really can be honest. You know, I think sometimes we should be like, I'll be really honest, and then they're really honest, and people are like, oh,
yeah.
So like,
you don't like what they're going to say.
You've got to let them actually say what they think.
Yeah, and it's uncomfortable because they might be really criticising something that we're really protective over, or we think it's totally fine. So if you're going to engage the pupil voice, do it with sincerity, and because they're super smart and they'll know if it's not. Now that positive, next one up is positive and universal focus on well-being. So, you know, that is a really positive approach. How do we maintain wellness? What are all of the amazing things that we can do, both in school, out of school, that parents can do, families can do, that really engage and build on well-being?
I think so. I'm interrupting you. I think that's a lovely point as well. It's that it's so easy to forget about parents and carers. You know, we are all involved in it. So, you know, if you're thinking, oh, how can we bring parents on board? You know, give them homework to do, which doesn't feel like homework. So it's just opportunities to, I don't know, maybe share some meditation stuff you've been doing, mindfulness stuff, or maybe it's a chance for them to share something else that they've learned that their parents might not know, or the other way around. So you've got this sort of rounded sort of support going on around them, and making the parents and carers feel like they're involved in it. They are.
It's really important, because I mean, if you're doing all the work and then we go back and that messaging is not reaching home, there might often be this real disconnect. Yeah. And I think also, you know, my experience of working in education is that parents are quite quick to blame school. School can sometimes blame the parents, and then the children are kind of caught up in this. And I think like everybody working together, everybody on the same page, and that early intervention, we've just spoken about that, early intervention and identification. If people are just not okay, you notice those signs, just really have a process built in where we can identify them, they can then refer themselves, or parents can come and talk. But, you know, those really early things, rather than leave things till they're quite late.
Yeah.
And if I just take an example about that around transitions, you know, what we know is that a lot of the time, a lot of mental health issues in children present themselves already in primary, right?
Yeah.
And nothing often gets done really. And then obviously transition points are really stressful, you know, from primary to secondary. And then so things escalate. So if we nip it in the bud earlier and we have those early conversations, and also we help young people manage those transition points, because they're all about changes, and changes are really stressful, aren't they, for all of us?
Yeah.
So next one up here, skills-based work, e.g. self-compassion. So you just talked about meditation. Actually, how can we practice and work with self-compassion? What does that look like?
How do we speak to ourselves? How do we teach that to children, that kind of kindness and how we speak to ourselves when we're not in a good state? You know, you talked about that inner critic, that inner champion.
Yeah. How
do we actually do that? Because sometimes I think it's easy to say to children, oh, just listen to your inner champion or whatever. And it's like, can you give an example of that? You know, can you make that real for me? So let's have, you know, give them some sort of role play or something to do or whatever it is, and let them explore that.
And I'm thinking, as you're talking, there's no better way than us working with kids, modeling that, right? And learning how to communicate and to be compassionate to people and ourselves. So the next one there is about caring about the well-being and stress of staff, a biggie. So often what we do is we might focus on our children and young people, and then staff is a kind of afterthought, right? And a minute ago, I just said to you, you can't really separate them. They're one and the same. So we look after all of our people. When we think about this mental health approach, we need to nurture and look after everybody. And if things are difficult, can we do anything to minimize that stress? Can we listen to the staff and what they need? You know, it's a bit like involving the student, the pupil voice, isn't it? Actually, we also need to involve the staff voice. You know, what is it like for them? What are the things that are causing stress? Then we need to do something about it.
Yeah, very much so.
So then we've got the kind of helping students with change and transitions. We just talked about that. Transitions are really difficult. We need to do what we can to facilitate that and to help with that. And there's lots of things that we can do, isn't it? Like when we're in primary school, we might go and visit the school, or the school might visit the primary school.
Yeah.
And, you know, just thinking about also facilitating endings. So if someone's leaving primary school, actually that's a big step going into secondary school, and can they close that down properly and end that? And because often they might be changing, you know, schools, so their friendships change. And I think sort of facilitating that loss and that ending, and then inducting in a new one in a good way in that transition is really important. And then targeted responses and clear referral pathways for some. So again, we've got an example here using CAMS. I think if we train our school staff in mental health literacy, when you're talking about those referrals to agencies, like we use in this country, CAMS, they're already really overloaded, we know that. But how do we speak their language? So when you have that referral, it's like making sure that you're really hitting the points of what you want to get across. And the more mental health literacy you've got, the easier it is to sort of do that referral, so that actually we might get seen. Because sometimes it can go a bit awry with not getting all of that information across. And also, how do we work really closely with these referral pathways? So that everyone's working really closely together. And I think that's definitely the way that we need to do. Professionally, learning and staff development, continually like teaching staff, particularly about mental health and wellbeing, understanding the roots of challenging behaviour. Now, we're really good at picking up on challenging behaviour. We're not very good at seeing what's behind it. For many young people, it's behaviour issues, often down to anxiety issues or other issues going on in their life. Do you see what I mean? So before we start getting disciplinary and into behaviour, let's understand the why behind it, because sometimes it's not obvious, is there? No. And then we've got supportive, robust policies and clear boundaries. So think about policies. If you're going to write a policy, can you write a succinct policy that's fit for practice? Because I look at a lot of policies and they're lovely flowery languages, but no one really understands it, and it's very not really happening in practice. So I always go, do you write a policy where you can pick it up, and every person in that school can understand it. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And also can evidence it.
A working document or sort of something that's,
Yeah. But even when you can work with the young people to create it, for example. So supportive, and then we've got parents, families, governors, children, support staff included. So just everybody working together and doing some targeted work with parents, for example. Brilliant, you know, I've run webinars and short sessions in the sports hall for parents, just to kind of raise that mental health literacy and also just sort of share some of those practical things that they can do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to have a think now about ourselves, because as Caroline has mentioned, and we both feel is so important. It's really, you know, we need to be modelling how to keep ourselves mentally healthy in all ways, actually. So we're just going to have a little think about ourselves. So I'd like you to pop in the chat, like definitive sentence. What's the first word that comes to mind to complete this sentence? Teaching is 90%. I don't want you to think about it. I just want you to write the first word that comes to mind to finish off that sentence for us, from your perspective. Tiredness.
Yeah, Vicky's got time now. Relationships, Oliver says, lovely. Anybody else thinking 90%?
You don't have to be clever or impressive. You can literally just write the first thing in your head.
Any more?
Quiet.
You are a bit quiet, aren't
Oh,
you? Are you
coming in, coming in.
That's it. Oh, we've got
something fresh and interesting.
nice. That's good. Unique personality and empathy. I like it. Really nice. What else? What do you think it is?
Affection.
Oh, that's nice. Fazana, that's really nice. Affection. Yeah. Communicating, absolutely, Katie, nice. What else have we got?
For one more, and I'm going to move on, just so we finish on time.
Yeah.
Communicating was coming in. Thank you. Thank you for sharing
so much.
Okay, so I'm just going to show you some statistics which came in from Teacher Wellbeing Index 2022. So if you are somebody who's finding it quite challenging being a teacher with all your demands, you are not alone. So we've got some sort of very high statistics there. The bottom one, 78% of all staff experience mental health symptoms due to their work. So this is very much, everything that we've spoken about is very much, as Caroline's been saying, it's the whole community. We need to give ourselves what we're giving to what we're wanting to give to children, because we can't be giving what we haven't got ourselves. It's not authentic, and it's not kind to ourselves either. So this is my humour, I'm afraid. I mean, I found this really funny. You might not, but yeah. This lady's 39. She's loving teaching.
She's got a lovely face.
Hasn't she got a gorgeous face? Love.
I don't think she's 39.
That's the truth. So we're just really thinking about you now, and I think I was thinking back actually a couple of years ago when I did your choice Key Stage 4, and I wrote something for Sarah, I believe, about what's it called? I've got it here. About how self-reflection can help. And I think it sort of really, really is so important to think about ourselves and to think about all those things we need to do for ourselves. You are doing incredible, important work, but you cannot be giving from an empty vessel. And more than anything else, this is so important. You know, I was a teacher, and I have met so many teachers who are just running ragged to meet everybody else's needs and finding it very hard to meet their own. So really that list there, that are all the things that you would tell your children to do, but we're going to suggest that you do those for yourselves. I remember in my teaching days, I'd be lucky if I got to visit the loo for hours on end. I remember going into the toilet at the end of the day, finding it going to the loo, looking in the mirror and just being shocked because I look like I've been pulled through a hedge backwards. It was terrifying because I'd just been on the go, and like every opportunity, you know, I'm just give. It's exhausting and it's not sustainable. So if you are someone who feels like a lot of those statistics on that last page, maybe sometimes, maybe all the time, do some of these things. You know, really think about how you're eating, think about drinking water, getting enough sleep. All those things that are on the list are really, really important for you as well.
It's so important. So when I'm working with my clients, I always start with the basics. What's your diet like? What are you eating like? You know, what's your exercise like? And what's your sleep like?
Yeah.
And they're like literally the cornerstone of physical and mental health. So just, I mean, and we all get to that point where maybe those things start to drop off.
Yeah.
But so to start there, and then it's amazing what like a good night's sleep can do, or, you know, prioritising eating healthily, or just getting out and just going for a walk, a 20-minute walk a day. It's so good.
Just before you move that on, I think one of the things I've found that I would encourage you to do with your colleagues is to really try and open up that conversation. I think we're asking children to get honest with how they feel. We're getting teachers to get honest. You know, in an environment where they might have to be a bit vulnerable. You know, it can be quite hard. And actually for teachers to say, I feel overwhelmed with their colleagues, or I can't do this, or I don't understand, or I feel out of my depth. It's an environment where, in my experience, it's quite hard to do that. And I would encourage you emphatically to do that where you work, because once one person starts, everyone will go, okay, this is a safe space, I can do this too. As long as it is a safe space and you're using working agreements as you would in the classroom, so people don't gossip and everyone feels safe to do that. So do it for yourselves. Thank you. Right. So we just like you to make a pledge really to yourselves. You can share it with us if you feel, but you absolutely do not have to. We would really like you to go away from this with something positive for yourselves and something positive for your pupils or your school. So your pledges are two. One, sorry, as in two of them. The one different thing I'm going to do for myself is. So have a little think what that is, something that's easily achievable and that you will do for yourself. So
should we join this?
Okay.
So I think what I need to do is do more exercise.
Okay.
That's what I'm going to promise to do. Do more exercise, because I haven't been for a walk today, by the way. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Oh, look at that. We've got, look, Sarah's saying to be more active. I'm with you. It needs to happen. Rhoda says practice self-care. Yeah. Really important. I think for me, my pledge would be being kinder to myself. I can be really hard on myself, beat myself up a bit about stuff. So yeah, I'm going to make that. That's my pledge. Brilliant. That's my pledge. And then I think that one different thing I'm going to do for school pupil is. So that could be one of the preventative things, couldn't it? You know, bringing in a tech in, having some time to sort of sit and do colouring, or to have a little dance, or I don't know, something could be really small, or it could be a really big thing. You know, you think, wow, we really need to get in place some pupil voice, or we need to get some wellbeing ambassadors, get some kids sort of supporting the younger kids, or whatever it is. If you've got a little feeling for something, then give yourself a pledge and go for it, but make it achievable. Don't give yourself a huge job to do. I think then it's easy just to kind of not do it, isn't it? Very much so. Okay. Signposting, I'm not going to go through these. I think the link's going to be up for people. Sarah, is it? Can they see this? Yeah, brilliant. So there's just some very useful documents if you'd like to learn more about this. So they are there for you. And just to talk to you about the book, so as I said at the beginning, Caroline and I worked on the mental health units in this lovely purple book here. It's brand new, this is for Key Stage 5, but we do also have books I have books that I've written, look behind there, Key Stage 4, and a lovely Your Choice Key Stage 3 as well. In this one, you will find some of our mental health lessons. We wrote 3 in total together, didn't we? And Caroline shared her wonderful wisdom and expertise with me to write them, so really, really worth checking out, along with obviously all the other RSHE and living in the wider world topics. And just so you're aware, there's also some free tools and resources that Collins have kindly put together. I think Sarah's probably putting the link up for you, and you can find examples there. And one of our lessons from
the Key Stage 5 is actually up on that example as well, so you can have a look at that. So we are just about, we've got a little bit of time, that's good, just to think about if there's any questions you've got for us, or any thoughts, again, any best practice, anything that's suddenly come to mind, you thought, oh wow, maybe it's a pledge, you thought, I've just thought of a really good thing I want to do. Please do share it with us, we'd love to hear.
So how can teachers and parents work together to support pupils? So my instinctive response to that is, you remember a minute ago I said actually engage all parties. So let's say this would be a great question to ask teachers and ask parents. So rather than assume that you know the answer, why don't you put it out to parents, you know, and just say, we really want to work with you more. And actually you might put it out to teachers, how can you work with parents more? And just see if you can collate that bit of data. And then my mind would say, use that data to then put some actions in place, because what might come out of that bit of research is you might get some really innovative, interesting ideas. I think if you just had that, you know, that mental health whole school approach we just talked about, if you've got a mental health and wellbeing group, which is populated by all the different people, you have got a multidisciplinary group anyway, that gets to really listen to each other's perspectives. I think a lot of assumptions are made by parents about what teachers do, and you know, all they get is possibly the child's perspective of what happens, and a lot of teachers also could be quite judgmental, I think, about parents. And so there is often this kind of really big gap around, often it's like blame. You know, everybody seems to be blaming each other. There's that defensiveness. And actually, if we all work together and start off by having that, how can we best support you? Conversation, and then getting that voice, those parents' voice involved as well, as well as all the teachers and the pupils. Yeah. And also, I don't know whether you thought about anything that you would think about with that.
No, I think that's really good practice. I mean, the one thing, the caveat there would be, look, we can't promise to do everything you all want to do, because if you get 100. You get 100 people coming back with, oh, you've got to do this, and then you don't, they could be a bit offended. So it's about obviously sort of going with things that are workable. You know, Caroline was talking about how it's a long-term process. You're not just going to make these changes overnight. So, you know, really taking the time to say thank you so much. We've really, you know, we've really thought about this. We're going to take this forward. So I would just say that, so you don't give yourself a stick. You know, you can actually, you know, not feel that you have to say yes to everything everyone says.
We've got a really interesting question here. You've spoken about the need to support personal staff team mental health. Do you have any suggestions for small, simple mental wellbeing check-ins for teacher teams who are often overstretched for time? Can you think of any?
Good question. I think part of it is about just opening up that honesty. You know, for myself, I was a PSHE lead many moons ago, and it would be about those same things, those same gut feelings that you get with the children that you get with staff, really, and just having those conversations. You know, people are quite closed off. It's about modelling that. So, you know, it can be sitting down. If you get to actually sit down in your lunch break, which I know is a novelty, but if you do, it's about actually owning where you're at, and not in a really dramatic, I'm going to chew your ear off like the whole way through about how I'm feeling thing, but just recognising how you're feeling, perhaps letting yourself be a bit vulnerable. I think that rubs off on people, you know, so I think it's about engaging with those. I think if you're incorporating new ideas into schools, trial them with the teachers first. You know, if you like, I've mentioned circle time, I do love circle time, but if you're thinking of bringing that into lessons, let the teachers have a go at that before they teach it, as a sort of a unit, have a go at what that feels like, and you know, if they want to pass, can they come back in again, what happens, you know. So if it's just interesting, let them explore what the children are exploring, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And then just to add to what you're saying, what we know is when you've got good leadership talking about mental health and also owning up to their own experiences of mental ill health or poor mental health, that's great, because suddenly you've got this much more transparency of space. We have to have an environment where it's okay not to be okay. And I think, you know, make sure it's always on the agenda. You know, if you've got your one-to-ones, make sure you've got a mental health and wellbeing question there every single time you meet. make sure that you can weave it in to all aspects. You know, you have staff meetings, maybe there's a little bit of kind of mental health resilience, you know, maybe you can do a CPD, make sure you've got your inset days, we've got a mental health component. Make sure that people are practicing what they preach. And I think the leadership team are really, really influential with that, because if the leadership team are behaving in a safe and responsible way and looking after their own mental health, everybody else that they support is also going to be really well protected.
Yeah, I agree.
So it kind of normalise that conversation. I think that's really important.
And actually, you talked about staff meetings. You could definitely have a sort of, you know, like a talking stick, go around how you're doing, and you don't have to say anything. But over time, if you keep, you know, I'm thinking back to that lovely class I mentioned earlier. You know, if you, over time, these things are the skills that people learn. It's like, okay, last week so and so talked about how she is really, really struggling with their mental health, and actually I've been a bit like that, so I'm going to talk about that this week. And if you encourage everyone to just sort of say thank you, and then it's like, oh, that felt good, actually putting that out there. So yeah, I hope that that's helpful.
It's really helpful. One last plug as well. 10 Keys to Happiness, really good. I think the patron's Dalai Lama, but they've got some really good resources around 10 Keys to Happier Living. And you could practice that in kind of pledges for each week as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. We can't say you need to reflect if we don't give you time to reflect. So we're going to be quiet and give you one last moment just to think about everything we said, let it settle in before we finish. So it's been a pleasure working with you all. I'm going to be quiet for a moment and let you reflect.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. It was lovely, lovely work. When we can't see you, we got a little vibe going, didn't we, with the chat? It's lovely to work with you and keep up with your amazing work. You're brilliant.
Trust in your process. It's one of my favourite sayings. Thank you so much for taking part of this, and make use of all of the resources we've got available. Thank you.
Thank you.